So I'm going to start with the end, just to make sure we know the point of what I'm going to say and get to, and then because there will be just a little bit of wandering along the way. I think it's really important to understand a little bit about history. The last fiscal crisis for states, the one that kind of began around 2001, was truly a 50-year event at least. I say at least because we've got data going back 50 years, and we know it was worse than anything else over that entire time period. It could have been worse than some earlier periods as well. The primary causes of that for states were first a severe and protracted market decline, meaning stock markets, asset markets, after a huge run-up, and a sharp decline in or slowdown in wages of high-income workers after a big run-up. In New York, we saw it very clearly in the financial services sector. In other places, we saw it a little bit differently. If you look out in California, it occurred in high-tech related industries, business management industries, but this huge buildup of wages in those industries prior, followed by a big fall. And it had devastating impacts on taxes. And all of this occurred in the midst of a very mild national recession. Here we are again. What we know is that stock markets and now real estate are declining very significantly in value, also after a huge run-up. And this means that capital gains, which is a substantial contributor to tax revenues, certainly in New York, but in some other places as well, are probably headed for 2 years of substantial declines. Wages of high-income workers, again in New York, in financial services-related industries, headed for large decline. And this time it's clear that the real economy is going to be significantly worse, and we're already seeing significant declines in real consumption, something we didn't see in the last recession. And so sales taxes as well will be hit hard. There's kind of nowhere to hide. Last time around, it was truly the income tax states that were hit hardest. They will be hit hard again, but those that rely on sales taxes are going to have substantial trouble too. And if we believe we don't have any comprehensive data for what's happened after the October market debacle, but the anecdotal reports from retailers suggest that not only have we begun to see a consumption decline, but it's going to get a lot worse. This is a graph showing the number of states that have declining economies at a given point in time relative to 3 months earlier. Monthly data. It's an index, a coincident economic index prepared by the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. It's one kind of quick way to get a measure, not of the severity of decline, but of the scope of decline, how broad it is throughout the nation. And it's the number of states. So somewhere between 0 and 50 states are declining at any point in time. I didn't manage to get recession bars on this graph, but you can see here's where we are now. Somewhere around 36 states with declining economies relative to 3 months prior. It's a measure largely of labor market conditions, employment, unemployment, hourly earnings. Those are the main things that go into it. You see, by that measure, this is the last data point in September. Last measure, not quite as bad as the last crisis, somewhat worse than the early 90s in terms of breadth or scope across the nation. Not quite as bad as the double-dip recession of the 80s. A measure of severity in the individual states. This is how big the decline is. There's 0, minus 0.5%, minus 1%. Still, again, so all the gloom and doom is kind of prospective and it's coming fast. But in terms of where we've been most recently, not yet as bad as those prior recessions. But the proper concern of governments is that things are likely to be a lot worse than back then. This is a map of housing price declines. A lot of the fiscal problems we saw in states were very closely tied to those states that had housing price declines. Dark red is very bad, Arizona. Light red is, well, these were light red, obviously. Something's changed, but these are the less bad states, but pretty bad. Some others have been declining as well. A lot of the fiscal problems were associated with the worst declines, and depending on the period we're looking at, Michigan and Rhode Island also had a lot of trouble. Those were the early states. The breadth of the current economic decline, that's what this measures, is certainly those states, but then, the Southeast in particular has been hit. New York, you might wonder, well, we haven't looked so bad, and that's the truth. Relative to the national average, until recently we have not been doing badly. But it's, again, this fear, quite properly based on the financial markets and financial services industry debacle that's been a problem. You can see that if you had oil or coal, things were looking a little bit better. Whether that's going to stay that way is a good question now that oil prices are back down below where they were. Wages, this is a graph of year-over-year growth in wages and salary, real wages and salaries. That's the blue line. You can see last recession, just kind of came down around 0. Haven't got anywhere near like that yet. And that green bouncy line is non-wage components of taxable income, not including capital gains, the kinds of things we can find in what the Bureau of Economic Analysis does that states typically tax. Slowing, not dramatically declined yet. Again, there's a lot worse to come, but the very recent conditions, as we can measure them, really, by these sorts of things, haven't been so bad. Consumption. Real consumption of durables, and green line is non-durables and services. States tend to build their sales taxes on the blue line, which, look at the last recession, already a lot worse, and the green line. So the decline in consumption already is a lot worse. And again, last data point here, September, things have gotten a lot worse since. So bad news for states that have sales taxes, as most do. Corporate profits, thankfully, New York and most other states don't rely significantly on them. This is year-over-year growth in real corporate profits, clearly declining a whopping 10%, but thankfully, while it does influence tax revenue, it's not a huge part of state tax revenue typically. Measure of New York versus the United States economy indexed to the beginning of 2007, and again, that coincident index is kind of smooth. Employment data wouldn't be quite so smooth, but it's just another indicator that we, until very recently, haven't done so badly. All right. Now start thinking about tax revenue. This is for the nation as a whole. Real tax revenue. I should say it's adjusted with the economy-wide index, the GDP price index, for reasons we don't get into if we want to at some other point. But that's the inflation measure we use. State taxes. This is year-over-year growth in inflation-adjusted taxes, rising to by quarter, 4-quarter moving average, rising up to 8%, and then drastically slowing down through the second quarter of 2008. And local taxes, which tend historically to be extraordinarily stable, have also slowed quite sharply, although not to as slow a rate as the state, and not from as high a peak. And the reasons, these are the three main taxes of the state and local sector. Same kind of graph, year-over-year percent change in real tax revenue smoothed over 4 quarters. The income tax is what drove that peak and is now slowing. The sales tax is now declining. This is 0, declining year-over-year in real terms. And property taxes have begun to slow. New York state taxes. This is a measure of real per capita state government taxes, a 4-quarter moving average. The blue line is New York. The green line is the United States. And the other 2 lines are 2 of our favorite housing bust states. And I guess the answer is you'd rather be, until recently, you'd rather be in New York than Arizona. We've been doing pretty well. This is through the second quarter of 2008.